Hey, this is Brad Davis, and you're listening to the Musicality Podcast.
Ever wondered why some people seem to have a gift for music? Have you ever wished that you could play by ear, sing in tune, improvise and jam? You're in the right place. Time to turn those wishes into reality. Welcome to the Musicality Podcast with your host, Christopher Sutton.
Hi, this is Christopher, founder of Musical You, and welcome to the Musicality Podcast. Today I'm talking with Brad Davis, a guitar icon in the world of country and bluegrass music. As you'll hear on this episode, Brad has had an amazing career. As a go-to stage and session player in Nashville, he's played on Grammy-winning albums and worked with artists like Willie Nelson, Sheryl Crow, Earl Scruggs, Emmylou Harris, and Johnny Cash. He's also an artist in his own right, recording critically acclaimed albums under his own name and writing songs that have been recorded by well-known artists like Tim McGraw and Billy Bob Thornton. With that resume, you might be expecting a lot of swagger and pride, but Brad is actually one of the most down-to-earth and humble musicians I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. I found that really inspiring. This episode is a bit longer than most because there was just so much to learn from Brad. We talk about how he got started and what it took to rise rapidly through the ranks and perform with some of the biggest names in the world. How he was forging his own path from the beginning, and how to do that without getting lost and stalling out like so many who try to go their own way. He also shared a lot of killer insights for the guitarists in our audience, like how and why his double down up guitar technique can be like adding a second language alongside the traditional down up technique. Don't miss the videos we'll put in the show notes to see this in action. We talk about how he's able to hone in on exactly the right region of the strings for his right hand to bring out the best sound on any guitar, and which of your two hands is the most important to train for technique. And even as a busy recording artist and record producer, he's still doing this 15 minutes every day himself. This conversation is quite a blend of guitar specifics and deep insights on career and collaboration in music. So if you're not a guitarist, please don't be put off. And in fact, if you pay attention, I think a lot of Brad's comments about guitar can actually be highly instructive for any musician. Oh, and don't miss Brad revealing the embarrassing nickname he earned around Nashville and why. My name is Christopher Sutton, and this is the Musicality Podcast from Musical You. Welcome to the show, Brad. Thank you for joining us today.
It's good to be here, and thanks for serving some digital coffee for me. I appreciate that.
So I'd love to hear, you've had an incredible career in music, you know, the people you've collaborated with and the success you've had. I'd love to hear in your own words what that journey's been like. How did you first get started, and what was it like to develop as a musician over the years and have such career success in different areas?
You know, I started at an early age, and you've got a little bit of that information that's going to be in this podcast. But I started early because I got inspired. You know, John Denver, Norman Blake, Doc Watson, Eddie Van Halen, John. You know, there were several. Tony Rice, obviously, Clarence White. Anyway, there were several batches of players that inspired me, and I think they inspired me on a broad range. It wasn't like, ooh, I like the one. I like the 14 or the 20 or the 30, and that was a problem for me a little bit. I think because it spread me kind of wide. But I think as people listen to this, to get better, I had to grab one of them. I had to grab one piece. And had to eat that and digest that one first. And once that was done, I had a little, if you want to call it, a little stripe on the shoulder. And I went up to the next one. I went to the next one and the next one. So I had to do that. But I think they all influenced me audibly, you know, as a player, and made me go, wow, this is great. It's such a big garden, and I want all the vegetables in the garden. But I've got to eat, you know, this thing first, and to get back to the tomatoes, and you know that was kind of an idea. Played in the Metroplex for years, you know, developing, listening to different musicians. And when I first heard Van Halen, I didn't see them; I only heard them on the radio, and so I heard this beedly tapping thing that Eddie Van Halen does, And I'd listened to it prior to that and was inspired and thought, wow, that's really wild. He's probably doing that with a pick. So I didn't know any different. I thought, I'm going to take my pick and try to mimic that sound the best I can. So I did so and came up with this technique called double down up. And so I asked all my heroes, Tony Rice, Dan Curry, Doc Watson, all of the players, Norman Blake, all those players out there that I love so much and still do. Do you do this? And they, no, don't do that. That's not good. Don't do that. 2 downs and 1 up. And so I thought, well, it sounds really cool. I like the way it sounds. And even my instructor, he got me started, and I showed him this technique, and he said, don't do that. That's weird. Don't do, you need to go down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. And I go, well, I know I need to go down, up, down, up, down, up. But I want to add something else. This is neat. It sounds great. And basically, when I met a drummer, he said, well, that's a rudiment, but that's a rudiment for a drummer. And that's how we would practice with our sticks on a pad. We'd go, that. We'd back and forth with our sticks left and right. And I thought, wow, that's really crazy, man. I love the rhythm, and so I'm a rhythm freak. I love rhythms, I'm really a freak about rhythms. And that's probably why I play a lot of other instruments besides guitar. And I'm not just a guitar guy, but it led me to believe that I got something kind of unique. And then I saw Van Halen live, and I thought, wow, I totally missed the boat. This guy's got his tongue sticking out like 7 inches, and he's tapping on the guitar on this huge stage with this massive crowd. And I totally missed it. He's tapping. I'm not, I'm doing it with a pick. So I said, man, I really messed up on this. But, anyway, so I kind of got a little discouraged with it for a while, and then started working on fiddle tunes with it, and taking like a traditional fiddle tunes and basically putting the technique in with that. And if I found a place where I was having an issue on speed, I would plug it in. So what happened is that the technique came to me from listening to Van Halen, but I didn't have any licks. No one knew about it. Never heard of it before. Don't do that. This is terrible. That's awful. Don't try to integrate that. So that's all I got from everybody. So basically I had no licks. So I just muted my left hand, and I got a metronome as I was learning and playing all kinds of other music and songs. And I would take a little bit of time each day to go da 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 da, just on the strings muted, no left hand. So what it did, it has allowed me to focus. So that kind of helped me later on now in years as I do instructional material to tell people to focus on this right hand. If they don't get the right hand down, they might as well just quit, because the left hand will always follow. And so I worked really hard just on that rudiment to get it super fast. And actually, it's a great way to practice. If you're at home and the TV's on, your wife's watching Hallmark and you don't want to disturb her, you can cover the neck with a towel and you can practice, and still get your brownie points while you're at the house. So it works really great. So that technique, basically, when I saw Van Halen do it, I thought, wow, this is really crazy. I totally messed up. And then it got integrated into fiddle tunes, and I started using it live with, we had a group, Davis and Company, and a couple of this local groups that we had down through the years. And it started garnering some, wow, what are you doing? Your hand is not moving. What are you doing there? And I said, well, I'm just going down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, And then the technique got a little bit more expanded, and I started to flip it upside down. And I started to also, instead of flipping it upside down, I started adding some standard down ups in front and back. And basically, the down, down, up was a train car. And I was basically going to either use the train car by itself, or I was going to add a couple of links in front of the train car or behind it to expand the lick, or double the train car, or, that kind of theory. And just a pretty simplistic way to look at it. But it allowed me to kind of figure out mathematically how I was going to try to broaden this. And I'm not a technical guy. I learned by ear. However, I'm adjunct at Texas A&M, and I do audio production for A&M. So I've had to kind of quantify analytically and academically the things that I know to teach in that arena. I've always made fun of PhDs and, for years. But I have a high respect for them, and I should have always had a high respect for them because I'm kind of sitting in that thing as artist in residence. And they do treat me with respect because I know more about what I do than they do at this particular college. But the technique is really giving me a little bit of a calling card, even though my down up is fundamentally necessary for survival. You have to have down, up, down, up, down, up. Steve Kaufman has a camp, and I got asked there one year to teach, only because the students asked. Steve does not like my technique. I love Steve to death. He's a very talented player and won a lot of contests, and he's brilliant, the things that he's done for our industry. But he does not like my technique at all, because his technique he teaches is down, up, down, up, down, up, and you have to use a certain pick. And that's really important until you decide you want to maybe integrate French into your language or Spanish into your language, or that I look at double down up as another language, just like if you added jazz or sweeping, it's another language into what you already speak. So it's always been impressive to me that someone's bilingual or they're quadlingual or whatever. It blows me away. Like, wow, I know one language, man. That's all I know. So to be able to do it on the guitar, it's kind of like, wow, that's amazing. So I really wanted to integrate that in. I got asked to the camp one year, and it didn't turn out well. I haven't been asked back because it's like having candy. When you show them something like the double down up, that's so simple, down, down, up, that's all it is. And you repeat that a million times over. It's like starting the motor, you go, brrr, and this right hand just does down, down, up, down, down, up, and you just rotate that like a stylist across the strings. Knowing where to put it is important, and that's a little bit of a technique, and a little bit of it takes a little bit of time to do that. But the thing is that they hear it and they go, whoa, that's amazing. Well, that does not sound like this guy. And that, to me, Christopher, if I can do anything in this business is having a thumbprint. If I do anything, if I can just have a thumbprint and someone go, that guy sounded different, that's payoff, total payoff for me, man. So it ended up being something that made me have two guns in the holsters. I had a right and a left gun at this point. I had my down, up, if I may, and then the double down up. And so when I did a session in Abilene, Texas, and stop me if you need to. But I did a session in Abilene, Texas with Ricky Skaggs' band leader at the time, Gary Smith. And I was excited. Wow, this is great. Gary Smith, they were hot. Ricky's hit just came out. That was really big on the country charts. And I was a fan, obviously. He was a bluegrasser and moved into country. So I was like, wow, this is great. So I got asked, man, you're fantastic. We'd love for you to sing harmony and play rhythm. And I said, that would be great, man. Well, I was going to North Texas State University at the time, which is now University of Texas. I was an art major. I was trying to get a backup in case I moved to Nashville. I'd have some kind of a backup. But I would jam with the 1 o'clock band during my breaks in the hallway. So we had a lot of fun, man. And I got to meet Clint Strong, the guitar player for Merle Haggard for years. And anyway, I got to really kind of get a little taste of some other stuff at that point. But I got a chance to work for Skaggs, and my professor said, go, you'll never get this opportunity again. Leave. Go do it. You have 1 year left. Go do it. So I left. I got there, got my apartment, and said, I'm coming up. And I said, great. We'll set up the meeting with Ricky. And I kind of knew Ricky already. I met him a couple times at bluegrass festivals. And neat thing about a bluegrass festival, I think, is that you can actually walk up and meet people. It's getting a little bit different. People have managers, and I'm in the same boat. I have agents and people that represent me, and they do that for a reason to keep you safe and not wear you out and that kind of thing. But you can actually get close to folks, and that's kind of nice. And so I kind of had met Ricky prior, maybe a couple of years ago. And so I got to town, and 2 weeks went by, no phone call. I get my apartment. I'm in Nashville. This is a pretty big deal. I just moved. I'm 20 years old. I'm like, wow, this is great. No phone call. And I'm just at the apartment. I'm thinking, what's up with this? So I had Country Boy. I think that was a song that had just gone number one for Ricky. And I had it on the Codaphone, back when we had Codaphones. And I had it just blistering fast. I played it and said, it's Brad Davis. If you want me, leave a message, kind of thing. And so I had that on my Codaphone, which leads to something right after this. So I wanted to tell you about that. And then I got a call 2 weeks later, and Gary Smith said, you don't have the job. And I was like, what, are you kidding me? I've told my family.
So you had left university, you'd moved city, you'd waited a few weeks, and only to be told that, no, actually, you don't have the gig.
Oh, it was terrible, man. I was like, wow, wow, you mean I've told the entire world that I've got this job. And I don't. So what am I, a liar? So anyway, Waylon Patton had been offered the job. And Waylon was a very good singer and very talented artist and songwriter. And they had offered it to him. He turned it down. And so they offered it to me. And so when I got to town, Waylon said, I think I want that job. And so I called Ricky back, and Ricky said, okay, well, call Brad, tell him you're out. So I was like, oh, are you kidding me, man? This is awful. So I had about 3 days of just sheer dark depression. I remember, and it was great for me. It was probably the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because it gave me some really thick skin. And I guess the positive thing is if you can get through that and just get on the other side and go, okay, dust yourself off and go, okay, I guess I'll work at Walmart. No big deal. Whatever it takes. So I got a job at Opryland. Opryland was hiring at that point, and I did not have. I played guitar. I wanted to play guitar. It was what I was best at. So I got there, and all the guitar positions were taken. And they said, "Well, you can take fiddle." And I said, "Well, I'm pretty darn good on mandolin, but I don't really play fiddle that well." So I bought a $200 fiddle at this pawn shop. I had tuners on it, so I could tune it easier than the regular tuners. And so I started working on fiddle, because all they wanted was that scratchy riverboat fiddle. They didn't need anything like super detailed. So thank God for me, it was really just basic fiddle. And that was just, doing the old simple stuff as you walk on the riverboat there at Opryland. And I did that for about 6 months. And then I got the call from Gary's brother, Jack Smith. And Jack was the band leader for the Forrester Sisters, and they were signed to Warner Brothers. And it had 3 number ones, and we're getting ready to do their 4th number one. And Jack said, I just got a call from my brother. He says, you didn't get the job with Skaggs. And so I was pretty broke apart about that, And he said, but if that's you playing on this machine, you're hired. And I was like, hired to do what? And he said, play lead guitar. I was like, wow, lead guitar. Wow. This is amazing, So you never know. Things always work out. So it was for the Forrester Sisters, and they just had their hit, Just in Case You Ever Change Your Mind. Just in case, I guess is what they called it. So I get the job, and we open for Conway Twitty in arenas. So I go from a quiet bluegrass player to massive volumes, and huge crowds. The guy who left the gig was a really good flat picker, Roy Curry, and a good friend of mine. And I don't know if he had any play in getting me in on the gig, but he was amazing. And I saw videos of him, and I was like, man, I got to step it up. This guy's good, man. So all I had to do was learn the material and mimic it exactly the way he played it for at least a couple months. And I've learned this over time. And then you morph it into your own thing, and they like you and they're comfortable. But you gotta give them what they're used to. You really do. And so I did. I stepped into the gig. I didn't have electric guitar at the time. I went down and bought one at the pawn shop and a pedal. And they already had the electric rig was on stage. And so they made us wear these baggy black pleated pants and these shirts, and the band had to match. And I was glad, because my legs were shaking, man. I didn't want anybody to know my legs were shaking. So the baggier the pants were, it was better. But it was scary. I had to learn all of these lead parts. And I had a good ear, because I had been learning bluegrass. I'd been learning off records. We didn't have a slow-mo box. We didn't have any of that stuff. It was strictly off albums. So we had to listen multiple times. And I teach a class with this as we roll along. Through time, I teach a class where you get played a lick or a phrase, and you got to memorize it instantly. And my ear was good enough to learn this stuff note for note, and to actually know where the timbre was and where he played it at. I'd go like, no, that's not right. He's up here. And most guitar players, and people always need to remember this. They're going to go for the easiest place possible. They are going to go the easiest route. We are lazy musicians. I say that loosely, because I'm always on time, and I'm a 5 a.m. kind of guy. And I say that about everybody else loosely as well. But it's the old joke, right? But the thing is, you want to go to the easiest possible spot to play that. So you got to think, no, I'll never be able to figure that out. There's no way. No, you go to the easiest spot, man, you think it's going to be at, and start there, and then go to the next spot that obviously would be an octave higher, or just a note that's the same note. It's just up the neck. As on guitar, we've got that availability to go up the neck and play the same thing. So you always got to think about, it's not going to be that tough. It's not going to be that hard. And the reason I say that is years later, if I can interject, I got hired to play with John Jorgensen's quintet. And it was a pile of material that I had never, ever looked at in my entire life. I mean, chords. I mean, I knew some jazz chords, but I could fake my way. But I really didn't know what it was all about. And I'm just going to interject quickly on this because I had no idea. And I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? And I had to basically go to that simple part, that simple area that I thought this guy was playing the rhythm at. And I had to get there first and get my head wrapped around it. And then I could expand on it because it's overwhelming. I mean, you get 15 CDs on Friday night at 8 o'clock. You do a 2-hour rehearsal. The bus leaves Saturday at midnight. And that's all rehearsal you've got. And you've got to learn all of these songs note for note to go and start doing a show. You're at the Knitting Factory in New York on Sunday. I mean, so you're freaking out. You're going like, I'm not going to sleep. I'm just not going to sleep at all. I'm going to just drink coffee and stay up and learn all this stuff. So you got to think about those easy spots. But, you know, it was playing with the Forster sisters was great. I had my technique. My main thing was to not really try to integrate it, but it was trying to mimic the guy that I was coming in to replace. We opened for Conway Twitty for a year, and then we opened for Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton. Big stages, huge venues, and so it was a bit of a shock to me, you know, when I first came in on this thing. I was there 5 years, and it gave me a chance to kind of say, I'm with so-and-so. That was really what helped a lot. I actually had well, who are you playing with? I'm playing with so-and-so, you know, and so that helped a lot in town. It gave me a lot of credibility, and it was a tough job. It was 4 ladies, and it was a 4-cylinder PMS motor, and they wouldn't mind me saying that. One day 2 would love you, that same day 2 would hate you, and it was a tough gig. You know, you had to deal with that dynamic. But it really helped me dealing with people. I think it helped me to know when to say things and when not to say things, and be a little bit more, have a really good bedside manner about things. And it kept you humble because they were on you all the time. If you made a mistake, they all 4 would look across the stage. And I'm thinking, don't do that. No one knows I made the mistake. No one knows. But now they do. So what it did is
So I know there's a whole... I hate to interrupt. I know there's a whole extra phase we haven't even covered to your musical journey, but I think it's fascinating that you were able to kind of jump in and swim at the deep end like that. And
scary.
As an instructor yourself, I'm sure you've encountered this with students where they're torn between wanting to follow a course or follow what they're told to do versus finding their own path and learning in their own way. And it sounds like you were very much kind of forging your own path, learning by ear, figuring out your own technique. Where did the confidence to do that come from? And do you have any insight on what made that work? Because, you know, there are so many students who go that route and just kind of wander in the wilderness without really making progress. I
think the one thing that made that work was there was a fiddle player named Solomon. Vernon Solomon was his name. And he was a fiddle player, a traditional Texas fiddle player. And at a jam session one time, he grabbed my pinky and he grabbed a pair of nips for his strings, you know, to trim his strings off, and was threatening to cut my pinky off. And he said, you don't use it. So I'm taking it off. I don't see you using it at all. So I said, okay, fine, man. That's great. I'll use it. You know, I'll try to use it. So anyway, I started using it, and he said, you know, take that fiddle tune and, you know it in C. Yeah, you're real confident. Oh, man, I got this in C. So you got to get one key confident. You should take one tune that you know the melody so well that you can hum it all the way through the part A and part B. And if you can't hum the melody all the way through, you should pick another song. Pick one song that you really have the melody learned really well. And then you take that song and he suggested learning it in D. You already know it. just throw it in D. So now the challenge is not so hard, right? So you kind of know what you're doing. You're kind of a little bit familiar with it, and you throw it in G, and you throw it in F, and throw it in about 5 different keys. And when you do that, your confidence level quadruples. I mean, I can't tell you what it does for you, but it will absolutely turn you into Superman, to where you feel like, wow, man, I can, it's almost like speaking 5 languages, and C. A lot of times you get in a jam session, they go, we're going to do Soldier's Joy. And so it's either in G or C, one of the 2 keys. So what key are we going to do it in? We're going to do it in C. So do it in C. The fiddle players like it in C. But if you modulate and pull it to another key, all of a sudden you're almost looked as being a little bit of a bluegrass professor. You've jumped it up a notch. You popped it up into this next realm, and everybody's going, I don't know it in A, but this guy does. And so all of a sudden your confidence level shoots way up. And that's the first way to do it. Is take something very simple. And you may want to take something as simple. I've got some classes I do that are beginner classes, and we're getting ready to do a buttload of new stuff with Alvarez. And based on this type of thing, where you may want to take Jingle Bells. It's Christmas. Take something by the back of your hand, and the melody, and learn it in about 5 different keys. Just the front of it. Jingle bells, da 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 da. That's it. Just learn that in about 5 different keys. Take a little bit at a time. Bite off a little bit at a time. I do know this, that in my own playing, 7 days a week in the studio. And I love producing. I love writing. Writing's when I got in the business. That's actually the main reason I was going to get in the business, was to write songs. Love to write songs. But I have a studio here, because I really didn't know if I was going to have work. We came back to Texas for a sick father-in-law to be with him. And I'd left Sandbush at the time, which we'll get into that later. But they all said, you're committing career suicide. I said, well, he's only going to last 6 months. So anyway, we moved back here, set up a studio. So we're 7 days a week here. But at the same time, I'm busy. I try to take at least 10 minutes or 15 minutes a day. And I practice RPP, rhythm pick pattern, and my double down up. So I practice those things with a muted left hand. I do not use my left hand in notes, because I don't have time. I don't have time to focus. What's going to happen, Christopher, is I'll get a song idea. And then all of a sudden I'm off to an hour session. And I don't have time for that. But I'm not going to be able to shut that down, and I'll have to record it on the phone and try to keep some notes so I can come back to it later. It makes it frustrating. So I practice muted left hand, and the RPP pattern is taking just basically the first stage is G, C, and D. And on G, you're going to play down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, and you're going to do 6, 4, 3, 2, 6, 4, 3, 2 while you're holding the G chord. And so basically that's going to give you down, up, 6, 4, 3, 2, 6, 4, 3, 2. And it gives you basically the pattern of rhythm. However, it's like taking a photo and blowing it up 5 times and seeing all the pixels. It allows you to get inside the network of the rhythm and see all the skeleton of what you're doing. When you play fast, it's kind of loose, and you want to make sure you maintain the groove. But when you slow down, you're able to grab more notes, and so you're able to spread that photo really wide, and you're opening up the pixels, and you're able to grab them each note individually. So I practice on that. G is 6, 4, 3, 2, and C is 5, 4, 3, 2. Obviously, we start with the bass note on C at the top, which is the low section of the guitar, but it's the top where the strings are. And then D, start 4, 3, 2, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so those patterns are run through them, and I'll do the muted left hand, and then I'll do my double down up. So those patterns help you keep fresh. Now, if someone's going to ask, can I use them on other chords? Yes, absolutely. If the bass note starts on the 6th string, throw an F or E or whatever you want to. Same thing with C, A minor. You got it. I mean, it's pretty easy to figure out, and mess with different chords using the RPP. But the RPP will keep your right hand so dialed in. For down, up, down, up, down, up in your rhythm, it'll make you a different player. Absolutely. But if you do just a little each day, and don't bite off too much, it makes a huge difference. But it basically, that technique of playing down, up, and I will have to come in, Steve Kaufman, on that, is essential. I mean, it's like having socks on before you put your shoes on. You got to have it. You cannot move forward without it. I wouldn't want to just have the double down up. It would be monotonous. It wouldn't sound great. it would be like way too many notes. It's not that musical. You have to really work hard to make it musical. That's the problem. The left hand comes in on that particular part of the equation.
So I think that's a great example maybe of how you approach this whole thing of, sticking to the course versus forging your own path, in that clearly you are, it's funny, you said bluegrass professor there. I think that's a great term for it. You found your own path and you were constantly learning and learning by ear, but clearly you were doing it in a very intentional, methodical and disciplined way. I mean, for someone who's had your success to still be practicing technique 15 minutes a day is quite a sign of how seriously you take it and how thoughtful you are in developing your musicality and maintaining the abilities you've developed.
Yeah, and it's the free throw. I mean, the ball players never stop practicing a free throw. Basketball players don't. And I'm not a sports guy because I don't have time for sports, but I know they always practice the free throw. They never stop. And so I look at this as being the free throw. It helps me on electric as well. And the one thing that it does, this is really important for players. And I'm so in love with the idea of helping others. It's fun, man. I love it. It's rewarding. And if anybody gets anything out of this interview, hopefully it'll be this. But the guitar has got a tension on acoustic guitar from the bottom of the fretboard all the way back to the bridge. There's a tension. And obviously towards the bottom of the fretboard, it's real loose. And towards the bridge, it's tighter. Everybody's different. Everybody feels that tension different. Everybody wants a different tension. They require a different tension for balance. And it's all basically based on your balance. How is your balance? So when you play something, you don't crash. You got a great steady right hand. And a lot of times people will practice and go, I can't get it any faster than this. I'm as slow as I can. I practice at 60 beats a minute. When I do my RPP, it's that slow. It's extremely methodical and slow. And so it's almost, as someone has said before, it's like Chinese water torture. You hear that, the drop hitting you in the head. It's like, this is going to drive me crazy, man. So what I do is I use a drum machine program to do it, because a metronome would kill you after a while. You don't want to exit the planet if you had to do that every day. But it's nice having a drum machine because it gives you a little bit of a vibe on how to read the 1 and the 3. The kick, snare. Kick, hat, snare, kick, hat, snare. And it gives you a chance to learn how to read that, and it helps you a little bit better in playing with other people. But 60 beats a minute is slow. It's really slow. But the one thing about the RPP is that when you take it and you practice it, it helps you based on this tension thing I was talking about. It's real spongy towards the fretboard and real tight towards the bridge. Same thing on electric guitar. They're all the same. So you got to figure out where you're at. Where's your best spot? Where is, when golfers go to play and they're on TV, they try to find that spot. They go, this is my zone, and they're in it. And if they can grab that zone and hit the ball, they know they're going to be able to control it and hit it wherever they want to. It's the same thing about guitar. If you can just get yourself in that spot, you can basically do what your brain wants you to do and what you're trying to do for enjoyment or for work or whatever. The RPP will help you do that. When you do it left hand muted, you're basically, let's say you do it for G 6-4-3-2, you're going to start at the bridge and you're either going to post or you're going to float. Your right hand's going to post or float. Everybody's different. Everybody likes to do it different. I morph a lot because I'm doing electric guitar on sessions, and I'm doing mandolin, and I'm doing acoustic guitar and bass. So I'm constantly doing almost all of those because I have to, depending on the instrument and the type of style that I'm working on. But it forces you to move the hand towards the spongy part of the loose tension of the strings, then try the 6-4-3-2 and go, ooh, I don't like that at all. So you pull it back a little bit and you go, that's a little better. You pull it. So you find that gauge where you feel really comfortable. And as you do the RPP, it forces your hand to go to that same spot every time. Every single time. And so if I get a guitar thrown at me that I don't know the guitar, my right hand's going to find that spot. I mean, it's almost like it's a radar, man. It's like a computer. My right hand goes right to that spot. And someone says, my guitar's never sounded that good. The only reason is because I go to that spot that I'm comfortable in, and I know I can dial in that tone. My ear hears the tone I'm after. My right hand goes for the weighted part of the strings. Both of those come together, kind of like our audio and our video here. And that basically helps you zero the laser in on your spot that you need to have that awesome feel where you're totally relaxed and you're barely hanging on to the pick. I barely hold a pick, barely hold it. Now, if I've got a banjo player and I'm jamming, I'll grab it and I'll hold it a little tighter because I'm going to have to get a little bit more muscle on the acoustic. But for the most part, when I'm doing double down ups, I'm barely hanging on the pick, just barely holding it. I want to be in that super relaxed zone. And a lot of people go, man, you're beating the heck out of that guitar. It sounds like you're this wham, I go, I'm not. I'm playing lightly. And I remember meeting Levon Helm. I was on tour with the Boxmasters, and Billy Bob Thornton and Levon Helm were actually really good friends. And we went to his Midnight Ramble, which was so cool in New York, man. We got to go twice to that. But I saw Levon play. And Levon played like you thought he was killing those drums, man. You thought he was beating them to death. He was barely hitting them. But when you saw him, you thought, wow, it's the same idea. Barely. That's why people say your hand never moves when you're doing the double down up. It's like, how are you doing that? It just barely moves. I said, man, I'm going the easiest route possible. I want to move as little as possible and make as little effort so I can last longer while I'm doing what I'm doing. And so it always goes back to that thing that I joke about. Yeah, musicians are lazy. They'll go for the easiest path to the goal. And that's true. And I know a lot of times you go, oh, no, there's a lot of players that are really advanced. And yeah, there are. They're not as popular. The guys that are simple are the ones that actually, for some reason, are more popular. Look at Cash. Cash was not a great guitar player. He was an innovator. Emmylou Harris, not a great guitar player, innovator. You got Mark Knopfler, not like an amazing sit down and blow your head off, but man, he's got a technique that you just go, whoa. I learned it. I mimicked it for years because I was amazed by it. So so I'm just saying simplicity is so important. And as a bluegrass player, it's funny coming from me, a guy who plays a lot of notes on the double down up. I got a schooling when I got with the Forster sisters. I got a schooling on, I thought, man, I play with Skaggs. I could play a lot of notes, even though as a rhythm player, I had I think, grandeur ideas about playing a lot of notes and having fun. But with the Forster sisters, it was like, you got to play what you got to play. And then we need a break. I need 4 measures. I don't want you to play anything. Matter of fact, if you could smoke a cigarette, shut up and smoke the cigarette. Give me a break, So I learned that early on. And I think what taught me a lot about that was the music I was having to learn by ear, the lead playing that was on that record. And Skinner and Wallace out of Muscle Shoals had produced this record that I actually had jumped on the road with the Forsters. And so they had some great players on it. Amazing Muscle Shoals players on this record. Ray Flack actually was one of the players from the UK, and one of my favorite players of all time. And so I had to learn, what he was doing, and so there was a lot of space in there. It was tastefully done. Things were left out. And it reminds me of horn players. I'm such a horn freak. About their technique because they breathe. And they come back in, they take a breath, so they're taking a breath. And so they're allowing things to kind of breathe like a real living thing. And so that's what I want my guitar playing to be. And I know that sounds crazy. A lot of people on there may listen and go, oh, that guy plays notes all the time, man. He's like the note guy. And yes, there are times when it's appropriate within the double down up technique. If you do play a lot of notes, here's the challenge with that as somebody who's advanced at it and been doing it as long as I have. You have to create the notes become the bed. And what happens on top of the notes is you create melody on top of that. And so the melody on top of this, it's like having the car running. So the car's running in the background, and on top you're having a conversation with your mother. And so you can either talk a lot, or you could listen, she could listen, and it's kind of that kind of a vibe. But that motor's running in the background. So that's kind of the way the double down up is. It's purring in the background, and you're hitting notes that are basically creating almost simultaneous notes of the same note. And so you're not getting a lot of color. You're maintaining this neutral kind of thing. And on top of that, you're going so that's the easiest way I can describe it. And so it's almost like having a drummer back there playing, and you've got Arsenio Hall's guys who I've become friends with on their horn section. The drummer's back there, he's hitting that, and they're going, and they're doing the same thing. They're playing this drum beat. They play a phrase, they stay out, they play it. So it's the exact same concept mathematically as the double down ups. And a lot of times you hear all those notes and you go, oh, God, this is just too much to handle. So I had to figure out a way to create this motor. Obviously the drums are playing in a band and you don't think, quit, it's killing me. You like that. The drums are playing, the bass is playing with it, the horns are playing with it, the piano's playing with it, and it sounds good. So you don't say, get rid of that. You like that. So I wanted to create that type of an idea based on what I already knew about bands that would not offend the listener,
So you were touring with the Forrester Sisters, and where did things go from there?
I like on those tours, I had a chance to meet a lot of great players and rub elbows, and those connections are endlessly valuable. I had heard that Marty Stewart had fired Ray Flack. There had been a problem somewhere, maybe a personality problem. You never know. We know he's one of the best players in the world, so no question there. But personalities are important. So I wanted that gig. I really wanted that gig. And I've been playing electric for about 5 years. I wasn't great at it, but I was pretty good. So I wanted that gig. So I told a friend of mine, I'm going to try out for that gig. And they said, you don't want that gig. They're wild on the road, these guys. They're crazy. They're nuts. And he's hard to work with and blah, blah, blah. And so I said, well, I'm going to try out for it, man. So I went to the audition, and the guy that told me not to show up was in the line of the audition, about 10 ahead of me. There were 31 guys. I was 31. I was the last guy there that day. So everybody tried out, and a lot of really good players, amazing players. And the only problem with that gig is that these players thought they'd be playing lead guitar wide open all the time. Well, that wasn't the gig. The gig was to support Marty Stewart, first and foremost. So a lot of really hot shot telly players tried out, and they did not get the job. Maybe because he could tell they were unwilling to support him. I don't know, or attitude or whatever. But nonetheless, they were like some of the best of the very best. And so I was the last guy in. I brought in my amp, my guitar, and Marty Stewart. I wanted to kill him that day, and I told him that later, because he said, we're going to take all the songs that you learned on the CD, and we're going to sharp and flat them as we roll along randomly. So get ready. So it's like, you're kidding me, man. This is incredibly the worst thing in the world. Because some of these songs had to be played in certain keys because they just had to. That's just the way they were written, and they didn't sound right. And so I said, well, I'm going to tell you first off that this is probably going to really suck. I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, it's going to suck. But it's your show, and if you want to sharp and flat these and try me out, I'll do the very best I can. And anyway, so we went through it, and some things were great, some things were not so great. He said, can you flat pick? And I said, I can flat pick. I can flat pick. So we played Soldier's Joy and a couple other songs, and no problem there because I knew the songs, So he called back and said, you're the guy. And I said, what do you mean I'm the guy? Because I knew some of these players that were in line. They were amazing. And he said, I don't need an attitude. I don't need the best telly player in the world. I need a player that I can train and mold, and that will take lessons from Richard Bennett. And I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Bennett, but Richard Bennett produced Guitar Town for Steve Earle. He was with Neil Diamond for 19 years. And right now, since the recording industry's kind of had a lull in Nashville, he's on the road with Dire Straits. Well, Mark Knopfler. He's Mark Knopfler's second guitar player. Richard's amazing. So I had to go to his house 2 days a week and take a lesson. His wife was from Britain, and she would make a cup of tea every morning. Of course, spalts of tea, is what she called it. But it was really amazing, and I just really cherished those moments. And Richard would say, here's the intro. You can learn the rest of it. And I said, no. I have a cassette player. Cassettes were really hot at that time. I said, I'm going to put it on record. I'm going to set it down here. I want the whole song from front to back. Every song. I don't want to just shoot. Man, he went through every song and played it, and I sucked that stuff up like a sponge. So what happened is it gave me a chance to fit into this Marty Stewart gig, as the guy that actually played just like the record. I was playing all of them just like Richard, and anything that Ray did, I copied note for note. So it really gave me an advantage. So I went on tour with Marty, and we started at the famous club in LA. Palomino, the Palomino Club. And I showed up. We'd been rehearsing all the way out there, and I was a good singer, but I was doing singing and playing at the same time. And so I was pretty unhappy with what I was doing because the band was so loud I couldn't hear. And so I had to really get my head wrapped around how do I survive in this loud environment to where I can hear and do the best job I can. And so on the way out there, Johnny Cash was there that night. This was the hillbilly, hillbilly band is what it was called, first of all. And then it ended up changing to the Rock and Roll Cowboys when some of the members changed and left and went on to other things. But I stayed with that band. But it was Cash that night, Dwight Yoakam, and Tony Brown from MCA Records was there. So we played the first show, and then I overheard Tony Brown telling Marty Stewart, man, this guy's awful, man. He can't hardly sing and barely plays the parts right, you know. And I was scared to death, you know. Basically, I was nervous as can be. So I thought, golly, man, you know, I got to step it up. I got to get better. And so I started practicing. You know, we had hotel rooms on the road, and we had our own hotel rooms at times. And so I would just practice and practice and practice and practice, you know, millions of hours on these songs, you know, trying to make sure I had them down. And so I was there for, you know, quite a while. And with Marty Stewart, you get fired and then you get hired back. It was kind of like working for Johnny Cash, one of those kind of things. And sometimes you'd quit, but it was kind of like a family, you know, you'd come back. I remember my first year with Marty Stewart, he came up to us about a week before Christmas and said, I'm taking a year off. See you guys next year. And I at that particular point, it was probably actually about my third year in or fourth year in, I got married in Nashville, met my wife there and had our first kid and bought a van. And all of a sudden we got a year off with no pay. Holy smokes. So I ended up diving into session work pretty heavy. But it gave me a name. Marty Stewart kind of gave me a name. And Marty was fantastic in the fact that Tony Brown would say, you're not going to use your band. You're going to use, Harry Stinson on drums and Matt Rawlings on piano and Stuart Smith on guitar, blah, 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 blah. You know, all this stuff that he wanted done for the record label. Because Marty Stewart took Steve Earle's slot. That's how Marty got into MCA Records. Steve Earle had some serious medical issues and couldn't pull himself out of where he was at. And so they gave the entire slot to Marty. And it fit perfectly because Steve Earle and Marty Stewart kind of had the same kind of outlaw thing. So, I basically, I did a lot of session work, and Marty gave me Marty always used us. So Tony Brown would say, you can't use the band. He would say, I'm using my band or I'm not going to record. So I got to hand it to him. He was just an amazing coach, an amazing advocate for us. And we would play on Johnny Cash albums. We would play with Sheryl Crow, Emmylou Harris, Dwight Yoakam, even Steve Earle when he got back on his feet. All kinds of great opportunities. Willie Nelson, Bob Dylan, things that Marty would bring us in on. And the reason why he was so confident is because I was nicknamed the whipping post in Nashville behind my back. I didn't know this. But they said that because I would pretty much do whatever it was Marty's gig. I was hired to help Marty and do what he wanted me to do. And if he wanted me to do this, that's what my job was. My job was to do that. And if I didn't want to do that, I should leave. But he knew that in confident they could say, Emmylou Harris is playing guitar today and she's going to play rhythm. And her guitar playing is really cool, but we're probably not going to be able to keep that on the track. We're probably going to have to replace that. But nonetheless, Emmy's got an amazing style. So Marty said, I want you to watch her and I want you to replicate it as we're tracking. And we need your guitar to be her guitar on the track. So I watched her and figured out exactly where her hand was, where it was on the guitar, and grabbed the same type of a Gibson and basically had her guitar in one ear louder than the rest of the band so that I could basically mimic that. And so that's the kind of thing you were thrown into, was to really step it up and try to do the part that you needed to do. Anyway, so I was a whipping post, I think. For years they called me that. But I left at one point and went to work for the Sweethearts of the Rodeo, and they had a bluegrass band, and so I left and went to work for them, and just needed a change. I entered the Winfield Guitar Championship, knowing I wouldn't win with my double down ups. I had them at a certain level, and I wanted to kind of show that off. And my wife said, "You're probably going to win." I go, "No, it's either they're going to hate me or they're going to love me. One of two things. They're very traditional." And so I remember getting on stage and the crowd standing ovation, but the judges were not happy because I was not doing a standard technique, and they could tell. So, but I made an impression. The guy who won it next year said, "You're the guy that got the standing ovation in the black leather jacket that played the Stumble Down Up stuff." He said, "I won that year. You should have won." And I was like, No. You were fantastic, and you won. And that's what I got up there for me. I needed to do that. And when I left Marty Stewart, I went down there to just kind of say, I gotta do something for myself. But I got a job with the Sweethearts and was able to record on their records and try my Brad bender. I had patented the Brad bender, and it was a bender that, working for Marty Stewart, he bends on guitars. You're going to get kind of sucked into it. So I patented that and was able to work out the kinks on stage during touring and that kind of thing with them. I was there for about 2 years, and then Marty Stewart hired me back. And I came back with the Rock and Roll Cowboys at that point, and worked there for a good while. And it was fantastic. We had big venues. We co-headlined with Travis Tritt, so there were arenas, and it was fantastic. Great experience for me, and got a lot more credibility in the session world because I was asked back to a gig and paid more money, and it makes you look better. And I wasn't fired at that point. I actually left. I was trying to leave without getting fired. Marty would just get a whim and go, "Everybody's fired. You're out of here," and then hire you back. But that was kind of a normal thing. But it gave me a chance to work with a lot of great people that Rose Maddox, the Maddox brothers in Los Angeles. I never would have worked with them. I never would have met Billy Bob Thornton. I never would have met Cash or Dwight Yoakam, or the list goes on of the people that I met with Marty Stewart. Because Marty Stewart crossed a lot of bounds. He dated Kirstie Alley for years when he was working with Bob Dylan and Johnny Cash. So he was kind of in that, he wasn't just country. He was in that, that world folk art kind of cool thing. And so he crossed a lot of boundaries. And when he introduced me to Billy Bob Thornton, we became good friends. For some reason, we made a contact there. And I got to a certain point where it was time to leave the Rock and Roll Cowboys, and Billy Bob was going on tour in the UK. We had a 6-month tour in Europe. He had some film work to do, and so we formed that band. And I was able to jump in, since I had so much credibility in the studio for Marty Stewart. I was able to jump in and help co-produce that record. So it was like really awesome. Marty was on board to produce the first one for Luke Lewis at Mercury, and then he got kind of busy. And his career started taking off again, and so he had to bail out, and I hopped in the seat. It was an awesome opportunity. And Christopher, at Billy's house, it was like Big Pink. He bought Slash's house, which was owned by Cecil B. DeMille on Sunset and Roxbury Drive, and Slash had put a studio in there, lifted the house up, and put a studio in there for Guns N' Roses. Incredible. A $10 million house, and then you lift it up 5 feet. Can you imagine what that cost? I don't even want to think about it. So Billy Bob and Angelina Jolie bought that house, and so Marty was producing there, and that's how I met him there at the Cave. And then I engineered there for about 7 years. I didn't live in L.A., but Billy Bob Thornton had a room at his house, and that was my room. And I would just pop in. That's how close we've been over the years. And I was able to produce. But I met the guy who produced Simon and Garfunkel there, Robbie Robbins of the band. I met John Hyatt and Tommy Shaw from Styx. I mean, all these people that I met, I would have never met, ever, And, my thing is I'm always been around the business so long. It's not like, I got to would you please sign this for my wife or what? I never said that, and I probably should have. I probably should say, how about a selfie, man? Never said that. I never always acted like, it's one of the guys. I'm running the board. I'm not going to pay attention to that and make them feel comfortable. And probably missed out on a lot of opportunities, but I just never felt like it was the right thing to do, to bug them. But anyway.
Well, I think I've probably got to jump in and ask a couple of questions that I think are on everyone's mind, because you've mentioned such incredible stars there, and there can be few musicians who have collaborated with so many incredible people over the years, as you have. And I'm sure the audience is wondering a couple of things. One is, what was it like to work with people like, Willie Nelson, Sheryl Crow, Johnny Cash, the top of the top? What was most striking about them? What set them apart from other musicians, would you say? And the other, I think, is how is it that you've been able to have such incredible success and be I mean, you said the whipping post, but I think you could equally be called a chameleon or a secret weapon. You know, you've been behind the scenes in these incredible records that we all know and love. What is it in you, apart from, I think, clearly you're a very humble guy and maybe you're underselling yourself to a large extent, but what is it that let you collaborate with such big people?
You know, I didn't know what that was, but you've got to look at that as part of your value, you know, in the business as a producer or a session guy or a live musician, whatever part of the tree you're taking a limb on. And I have to sit on all those trees, or a teacher or an instructor. And I realized what it was when I got with Billy Bob Thornton. I didn't know, you know, what is it? I knew I'm doing my best job with Marty Stewart, and I'm doing exactly what he wants me to do, and I do it with enthusiasm, and I get it done, and I listen. And if I've got a good idea, I'll suggest it, and he'll go, yeah, that's okay, or not right now. We'll do that maybe on another session, you know, whatever. He was always great about telling you straight up what to do. But I realized this with Billy Bob Thornton is that there's an energy that you can honestly kind of, you know, project out there, and that energy, you know, can either be there or not, and you can be too scared to have that energy available for those that are around you, or you can be confident and making sure that energy gets out there. And it's not something you think about, well, I'm going to let a lot of energy out on this session because I know that so-and-so is a hard guy to work with. But I know that anytime I work with somebody famous, it's difficult because of the way the business is structured. And I remember, and this is an example really quickly, if I can say this, I was producing Tommy Shaw's record, his acoustic record. And, excuse me. And I wanted Alison Krauss to play on my solo record, and I've known Alison a long time. And she wanted to do it, but management would not allow her to do that because it was just not a cool thing for her to do that. I was with an indie label, and it made sense. But I waited and waited and waited, and they were playing the game, and finally went, oh, she can't do it that day. And so you've been through all that. You kind of know the drill from A to Z, how people are treated. And she wanted to do it, and honestly did. Anyway, so Tommy Shaw called her to come in, and actually I called her to come in and sing on Tommy's record because Tommy was a fan. So I was in a different position at that point. I was the producer of the record. She was coming in to sing. I was not the artist wanting her to sing on my record. So the tables were turned quite a bit. So she walked in and she said, you know, the phone call had come from my office at that point, but she really didn't know I was producing. So she said, who's producing? Oh, Brad Davis. I go, oh, Brad's producing. Oh, kind of shocked, you know. And so she sang, and Tommy was so enamored that he said, I love it, I love it. And she goes, I don't know, I think I should probably do that again. And I pretty much stepped out and sat on the side of the console there and let Tommy sit in the producer seat because he's well qualified, way more experienced than me. But she looked around the corner of the console where I was sitting, and she said, what do you think? You think I should do this again? Because Tommy would have taken anything she sang. And it was such a pleasure to say, you need to sing it again. That part was not good enough. You need to hit it again. And she knew she did. She totally knew it, but she needed to hear something honest back. But the thing is that, you know, when I work with Billy Bob and you know, that energy I put out with Tommy as well. And I think that's why I learned it from Billy, and I met Tommy at Billy's. And so it kind of progressed as Tommy was A, Billy was B, Alison was C. I got to work with those people in that order. I learned that Billy was so charged when we got in the studio because I was so excited about working and creating. We would sit, shake hands, and go, we're not going to sleep for 5 days. Are you okay with that? And I'd go, man, you know, I'm younger than you, not by much, but this is going to kill me because at a point you kind of go, man, I'm tired of staying up all night long. You know, I mean, I was not in my 50s, but it was tough. And so we would stay up and just kind of get euphoria would hit, and we'd be like, okay, woo, this is great. And we'd work. And then sometimes we would just crash on the floor and on the couch and then get back up and start again. It was almost like being a Big Pink, you know, basically the stories that I read without the dope, because I didn't do dope, and he's clean. He doesn't do any dope. And so it was almost, you know, that type of a deal where you can show that excitement or know when to turn it on. And a lot of times with these players, you said, what was it like working with those guys? They they knew the same thing that I'm talking about. They knew how to walk into a room, and the radar could read it immediately whether or not they should be reserved and kind of hold their composure, or if they should say, "Man, that's amazing, let's rock and roll." They knew whether or not to flip that switch. And so it's the same thing. I'll get in the studio with someone, and I'll go, I need to watch my excitement. I need to just be a little careful here because it's going to make the session go the wrong direction. And that's something you can't teach. There's not a book on it. You almost have to be in those situations where if it's really bad in a session, you know it immediately. And it's not going to turn out well. You're going to have to basically call a session and call it off and maybe do it another day or get another engineer or another producer. And I've been in those situations, and boy, they're really, really tough. You can crack ice in a situation like that. But, if you know how to, Sheryl Crow walked into the room and obviously very confident, and she's working with players that she already knows. Same with Emmylou Harris. Everybody knows everybody. I probably was less known of anybody. Our band, Marty's band, Sheryl really didn't know us. And Emmylou kind of knew me. Steve Earle, I'd worked with him a couple of times. Dwight Yoakam, I'd met him at the Palomino Club. So, it's a couple things. They kind of knew us, but I did not say, "Hey, Dwight," none of that. I always stayed to myself, because if I stayed reserved when they walked in, they sensed confidence. They didn't sense me going, "Oh man, it's good to see you." None of that went on. It was almost like if they waved at me, I'd say, "Hey, what's going on?" But I was doing my gig, and I'm there to do a job and to be a professional. And so I didn't want to, show any signs of non-confidence. I wanted to make sure I'm very confident. And I remember Marty Stewart said, "We're going to get you a 51 Telecaster." And I said, "Why a 51? Because I knew I couldn't pay for it. He said, "Well, we'll find it. I'll pay for it. You pay me a little each week out of your pay. But you need that, because when we go in the studio the very first time with Tony Brown, it's going to be like a $300,000 record, $400,000 record, very serious deal." He said he's going to hit the button on the talkback and he's going to say, "Davis, what kind of guitar do you got in there?" And if you said you had a Peavey, nothing against Peavey, but it's either got to be a Fender, Strat, or Telecaster to be warranted as great, because Tony was with Elvis, back in the day playing piano. So he said, if you have a 51 Telecaster, he will leave you alone. Okay, fine, great. So that happened. It happened exactly the way he said it did. He walked in and went, "Who's playing guitar today?" And Marty Stewart, Brad Davis. Of course, Tony's like going, we could have somebody better in the studio like Stuart Smith or Brent Rowan or one of those guys. And he says, "Davis, what kind of guitar you got?" And I said, "I fit 1951 Telecaster." Never said another word. I was totally cool. So a lot of it, had to be with your gear to some degree. And then the other had to be with basically your demeanor, but I always knew with Billy Bob that I could turn on that excitement. And I think, Steve Earle would walk in like the Tasmanian devil. He had no barometer at all. He was spinning the whole time, because that's just the way Steve is. But Emmy would come in with her, just kind of laid back, checking things out. You could always see how they read the room. And that was really important. And I think it's super important to be humble. Definitely. I mean, I would rather walk into a room and someone not even know I play and let the guitar do all the talking. That's more fun than ever saying how good I am, And it's always more fun to let that happen naturally. But there's no reason why you shouldn't be humble, because, there's just no reason for it. I mean, it's just a waste of time to do it any other way than that.
Awesome. Well, I think that humility has been recognized and rewarded, between your album credits, your success with your own records, and recently with a signature guitar from Alvarez. Next time they ask what you're playing in the studio, the answer will be Brad Davis. Tell us about that collaboration.
It's crazy. Well, Takamine got bought by Fender, and when they split apart, big problems with administration that Takamine just tried to hang on and pull things together. At the same time, I'm making a living. I got 2 kids in college, so I got to make a living, and I can't not make a living. So I'm very, very slow to come away from someone who's treated me so well after many years. But I thought, I can't stay with this and hunt for another gig with another company. So I have to break ties right now with Takamine. So all the Takamine executives and administration went to Alvarez, unbeknownst to my knowledge, because they needed a gig. And so I got a call from Robert E. Lee that used to be with Takamine. He's now with St. Louis Music. And he said, "Brad, I'm with Alvarez. Now, I hadn't thought about Alvarez in 30 years. I haven't given him a thought, I can tell you. And he said, I'm working with Alvarez, and we've got an amazing luthier. His name's Chris, and he's fantastic. And I just think you really need to check it out because Jack Pearson from the Allman Brothers is with them. And I thought, man, he's one of my favorite guitar players. Yeah. So anyway, so I gave it a listen. They sent me a prototype, just a rough, what they thought I would like. And it was amazing. I mean, it was as good as my my 50, 60, 18. It was as good as any guitar I had in the studio. And so I said, well, there's a couple of changes I want to make. You know, I'd want to change the bracing slightly and change the tone a little bit. I'm looking for something light and something heirloomable, if I can use that word. That would be like an heirloom guitar. But I could use it in the studio and use it live. And anyway, and I don't want my name on it. I want my initials on it, but not my name because somebody may not want my name on it. So anyway, they sent me the prototype. We kind of talked for a while, and it was just, I told my wife, if I don't accept this, I may never get asked again. I mean, I'm 54. I may lose my value, so I need to say yes and go with this. So the guitar was built with just a B and a D. And I don't know if you've seen I'll show it to you in the video, but it's just a B and a D. Real simple. Nice. And they wanted something fancy. And I understand that. I just wanted something simple, and just B and a D. And so Chris, with Alvarez, had to bring the guitar over. The guitar is from their vintage stash, so it's over 50 years old. And so paperwork was slow getting it together. It was all illegal. It's totally illegal until all the paperwork's done. So he had to fly from London to Japan. He's in London, that's where he's located. He had to fly from London to Japan, pick up the guitar, and then fly to the States, hoping that I would like this guitar. It's a pretty big gamble. So I just, they showed up here at the studio. They actually came to Commerce, man. St. Louis guys and Alvarez, and we called the press, and I wasn't going to do that, but I had a friend of mine said, you need to call the newspaper. It's a big deal. I said, I know it's a big deal. So they came out, brought the guitar, I strummed it, and it was like, I've been looking for this guitar for 30 years, and I was so blown away how good it sounded. And what's crazy, Christopher, is I'll get away and I'll play one of my other guitars, and I'll come back to this, and it's that where you play it and you just go, wow, it does, because it's a, Alvarez is it's not a Martin. It's not a Gibson. It's not those kind of guitars, but your brain sometimes makes you think that Martins are great, even if they're not great. That particular Martin is the best thing you've ever heard. And I understand the mental thing about that. All the pioneer advertising for so many years we've had to deal with. And Gibsons are great. Martins are great, no doubt. I've got many of each of those. But when I play this again and you play it, it's just amazing. You hear it recorded and you think, wow, this is really an amazing guitar, man. So they're going to make 2,000 of the $3,500 models, and then thousands of a $599 copy that'll be super good quality tops and backs and sides, but it won't be heirloomable wood that's over 50 years old. And it'll be a $599 production model that'll be a copy, which is the smartest thing I've ever heard anybody. I tried to get Takamine to do that, and they wouldn't. But that's smart because not everybody can afford a guitar like that. I know I can't on a regular basis afford guitars that expensive. Because I'm full-time in the business, and you just don't go blowing $3,500 on a guitar, man. But anyway, it's amazing, and I'm so glad to have it. So glad to be part of the team. So now what we're doing is we're going to be doing monthly videos and instructional stuff with Alvarez on a regular basis, and they're jumping in as support for touring. So our first show, I say our first show, I'm so used to being a side guy and being with a band. The first show I'm doing is going to be February the 16th at Poor David's Pub in Dallas, and we're going to debut the guitar and hopefully have some of the production models available. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And it's called Brad Davis Guitar Cafe. And what I'm going to do, I've been confused for years. I love so many kinds of music, so many different kinds. It's been a problem for me. So what I want to do is do a show that's going to incorporate all the music that I do on acoustic, which would be tribute to the 80s, tribute to David Bowie. I don't know if you heard any of those cuts that I did. A lot of the cuts that we did with CMH Records I'm in love with them because I grew up with them. And then we're also going to take and do a lot of original material, which stems from blues all the way to classical. I'm getting ready to do a classical play-on, bluegrass classical play-on for CMH. I'll start on that next week. And we'll start with one song.
The team here at Musical You have been absolutely loving those bluegrass tribute albums you've done. We're going to put a link in the show notes so everyone can hear, but I'd love to hear a bit more about how you create one of those bluegrass arrangements.
I take the original track and I throw it into Pro Tools. That's the only way to do it, because I think they've tried to do the classical many times and failed. Excuse me. And a lot of classical players bluegrass players may think, well, I'll write a chart on this and we'll try to cut it live. Well, that'll never work. You've got to have the original piece in there. If you're going to do a tribute, you almost got to copy it note for note. I mean, you almost have to. With regards to certain areas as a songwriter that I know I have legal flexibility to kind of bend it a little bit. But I do that. I'll put the original track inside of Pro Tools and I'll track with that as being my pilot. I did a Pearl Jam tribute, which never came out. Legality, we couldn't get it released because of legal issues. I tracked with them and they sped up. They breathe, they speed up and slow down. And same thing with Mumford and Sons. I had to do a tribute for those guys, and they sped up and slowed down on the record Babel. And I fell in love with those guys. And now I think everybody in the business now, everybody outside the business that owns a guitar, they believe that to be bluegrass now, because that's such a big deal. I mean, they made it on Rolling Stones. They were huge, and they're still touring, and I love their music. It's exciting. It's different. It's messed up. It's got a dent in it, and I love things that have some kind of a thumbprint. I don't want anything perfect, I want something that's kind of unique. So that music has to be done with the track inside. I just believe there's no other way to do it. And these classical things have been tried 5 times at CMH and failed. So they're very reluctant to try it one more time. However, they know that I'm pretty committed to making things sound just like the original. And so that's what we're going to start with dun, 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 dun. That'll be our first song that we try. And I'll do it a little at a time. I'll do the guitar work to a drum track. I'll get that track locked into a drum track, and then I'll do the guitar, and I'll try to figure out what instrument's going to be doing. And that takes probably about a week's worth of work, just figuring that out. And then I do the parts I can do. I'll play banjo on it and bass and mandolin. I'll probably hire a fiddle player because I'm not that good on fiddle. Don't like my fiddle playing that much, so I'll hire somebody on fiddle and maybe possibly dobro, but it'll be a lot of fun. That'll be next to come out on the market.
Fantastic. Well, we have covered so much there, and I must thank you for being so generous with your time and with sharing. I think you have such a striking and admirable attitude to all the work you've done, and clearly fame and success have not gone to your head, and I think there's so much our audience can learn, and I can learn from listening to you explain how that journey has been for you, how you've managed to bridge, technique development, forging your own path, having the right attitude walking into the studio or onto stage, and just always retaining that humility and willingness to learn. So thank you so much, Brad, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
The Musicality Podcast is brought to you by Musical You. Learn more at musical-u.com.
I loved this conversation. As you will have noticed, I didn't say all that much myself this time. I had chatted with Brad a little bit beforehand about the kinds of things we might cover in the interview, and really it seemed best to just let him take it away. Anytime I thought I might interject or steer the conversation, he'd say something else fascinating, and I just couldn't bring myself to interrupt. There was so much packed in there. Let's recap the big points. Brad learned by ear from the beginning, mimicking the players he admired most. Interestingly, he found that even mistakes, like wrongly guessing how Eddie Van Halen played so fast, can lead to success too. In that case, his developing a unique and now widely known style of bluegrass picking, the double down up technique. From the early days, learning by listening to the artists he admired, through rapidly digesting and replicating repertoire to be able to go on stage and on tour with big names, to becoming a trusted studio musician who could act like a chameleon and provide exactly the style of playing required to match each artist and record, Brad's ear was as important as his hands on the guitar. I thought it was fascinating to hear how Brad forged his own path rather than just learning the status quo and all the traditional methods, and how he avoided the normal pitfall that comes with doing that, which is to wander around blindly and not really progress. And he did that by being very intentional, methodical, and diligent about the way he learned. Brad is very aware of how he's developed his craft and the insights and practice along the way that led to him becoming such an in-demand artist. His dedication to honing his craft shows strongly in how he's still practicing guitar technique 15 minutes every day, even though anyone who listens to him would think he has certainly mastered it at this stage. He's not that good by luck or because he was blessed with a magical gift. He is that good because he has consciously decided to become and stay that good. I think what stood out most to me from this conversation was Brad's humility. It would be so easy with the incredible track record he has had to be big-headed and have a huge ego around his skill and talent and all his success. But as you just heard, he is practically the exact opposite of that. Listening to Brad talk, you wouldn't guess this is a man who's recorded with Johnny Cash or appeared on a Grammy award-winning album. But hearing him tell it, it seems clear that it's exactly that humility and willingness to be open to doing what's needed rather than behaving out of ego that has allowed him to have such consistent success. Brad said that what stood out about working with the big names boils down to attitude and ability to read the room and then adjust your communication accordingly. I felt a bit starstruck just hearing Brad mention some of the musicians he's worked with, but he has managed to bring just the right down-to-earth attitude to all his work, adjusting to the energy of the musicians and fitting in the perfect chameleon-like way. If you enjoyed this episode, I know you'll be curious to hear and see Brad in action. So do check out his website at braddavismusic.com. And in the show notes for this episode at musicalitypodcast.com, we'll have links to his music and videos of him demonstrating Double Down Up and the Brad Bender device. Thanks for listening to this episode. Stay tuned for our next one, where we'll be talking about what lets Brad transform 80s pop classics into bluegrass recordings, the skill of arranging music.
Thank you for listening to the Musicality Podcast. This episode has ended, but your musical journey continues. Head over to musicalitypodcast.com, where you will find the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content